Hi, this is Red for Real, and today we're going to be taking a quick look at Joe Biden's sale of his house to an MBNA executive in 1996. Now, this has resurfaced in the news as of recently, but with everything else going on, like the virus and Tara Reade's assault allegation, it hasn't got a lot of coverage, so I figure we just take a moment to get a better understanding of what's going on. Now, the first article we're going to be looking at is from everyone's favorite newspaper, the New York Times, and this was from October 1st, 2008, when Joe Biden was the running mate of Barack Obama for President of the United States. This article does do a good job at giving the history of the transfer of the property, though. So Joe Biden bought the property in 1975 for $185,000. In 1996, Joe Biden sold it to John R. Cochran III for $1.2 million. At the time, John Cochran was the vice chairman of MBNA Bank. Now, I'm sure all of you are well aware that MBNA and Joe Biden have a long, sordid history, such as Hunter Biden getting a job with them, large campaign contributions, and him backing legislation that they heavily lobbied for. But for this video, we're just going to focus on the sale of the house. So the first thing we had to do was make sure we got the right house. Here you can see the deed history. The Biden family was the owner until they transferred ownership to the Cochran family in 1996. Now, to come up with a value, we're going to use Zillow, which is free and readily available, and not always as accurate as you'd like it to be, but it is a good starting point. So Zillow estimates the value as of today at $1.75 million and a high range of $2.1 million. Now, to backtrack that to the value in 1996, we're going to be using the National House Price Index for the U.S. Again, like Zillow, this is free and readily available. Anyone in real estate would tell you that there are pockets, bubbles, regional prices that will not show up in the National Housing Price Index. But just for what we're doing today, this will work. So, using the housing price index and the value that we established from Zillow today, working backwards to 1996, we come up with a basis of 100 in 1996 and an index of 234.7 for the present value. That's roughly 235% increase in the value of the home since it was sold. Plugging in the Zillow estimates into that index, we come up with $750,000 based on the Zillow estimate and roughly $900,000 based on the high range of the Zillow estimate. Now, if we work backwards up into 1996 from the time that Joe Biden purchased the house in 1975 with a basis of 100, we get a indexed of 317 in 1996. Using the $185,000 Joe Biden spent on the house, we come up with a estimated value of roughly $600,000, and that's substantially lower than the other two estimates, and all these estimates are substantially lower than the $1.2 million that was paid for the house. Now, there's many things to consider. These are just Zillow and the National Housing Prices Index, so there is going to be some fluctuation. Joe Biden has said that he did substantial improvements to the property while he owned it, but where there's smoke, there could be fire, and the highest estimate comes in $300,000 lower than what the house sold for. But the real question is this an arm's length transaction, or could this be considered a overpayment or a straw sale? And to look at that, we have to consider a lot of things other than just the estimates. One of the things is that Mr. Cochran still lives in the house. So it's very hard to say that he overpaid for a house if he's continuing to live in it, because he hasn't unloaded it and turned either a profit or a loss on the house. Which reminds me of another story of another congressman that got in trouble for the same thing. Now, unfortunately, he was a Republican, and he had a extremely honorable history in politics and the military. But he did get sentenced to prison for accepting bribes, and one of those bribes was for selling his house over market value. And in this case, it was 2003, and he sold his house for $1.675 million. And the purchaser, unlike Cochran, turned around and put it on the market a month later. And he wasn't able to unload it for 8 months until he reduced the price to $975,000, or roughly $700,000 less than he purchased for less than a year prior. So because there's no quick turnaround like that, it makes it much more difficult to know if this was, two people that knew each other, helping each other out selling houses, or if this was an overpayment for a house. And again, really, the hardest point on that is that Mr. Cochran still lives in the house. So, with all that being said, there's still, where there's smoke, there could be fire. But because Mr. Cochran's still living in the house, and because our estimates of the value of the house are so rough, it's not unreasonable to think that this house was worth roughly what he paid for it. Now, another thing is, this has been in the news since 1996. As soon as this house was transferred, as soon as Joe Biden was running for re-election in the Senate, this was brought up, and I'm sure at some point between 1996 and now, people have gotten better numbers. They could have hired appraisers, got comparables, worked with more relative data than we can get today. So at the end of the day, this still looks shady, but is it criminal? And the answer from what I'm looking at and what I just went over is not criminal, that there's no way to establish that Mr. Cochran overpaid for this house in 1996. All right. Well, this is my first video. If you like this format, if you have any suggestions for me to improve or anything else, or anything you would like me to cover, please let me know in the comments, and I will read those and do my best to oblige. Have a good day and stay safe.